Greetings and welcome to another episode of Mic'd, the official podcast of St. Michael Catholic Church, Gastonia, where we are invested, transformed, so that we can be fully the Lord Jesus Christ. I am your host, Shane Page, and Director of Evangelization, and I am joined this week with the urbane Father Rossi, who is...
every time. Urbane. I don't know what that means either.
That's right. It's a complimentary adjective.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
pretty sure. I've not used any negative. I would not use.
I
would not do that to you, Father.
I know. Well, I can pick those.
Although I think I read somewhere that there are more negative adjectives than there are positives. And what does that
Probably.
say about the human imagination?
We are critical.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot. You can think of multiple critical things. But anyway, how are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm very excited to be in the summer season now. I'm not excited that the humidity is returning, but I guess you're saying El Nino.
Oh, this is June.
It's
Has been
just
nothing
wonderful.
compared to some
it's
Junes
been
that I've
tremendous.
experienced
I think it's
before.
been the best May and June up to this point that I've ever had living out here in the past 14 years. The temperature's just been tremendous.
Oh, it's
and
been
windows
tremendous.
open at night. I mean, just that's uncanny. So thank you, Jesus, for the great weather. But I know summer's going to get its dig in, and
It
it's
always
approaching.
comes.
The humidity is returning very quickly now.
Yeah. I'm ready for it. I'm
Yeah.
ready for a little bit of
I'm not,
warm
but
weather.
I know you are cold-blooded. Lizard.
That's right. It's never too warm for me. I'm just struggling, during the winter months. So anyway, the little flower hated the cold too.
She did?
Oh yeah, she suffered from the cold. She actually said that on while she was on her deathbed. If there's one thing I really suffered from, it was the cold.
Oh.
But anyway, so today, I thought we would talk a little bit about really how we're using this podcast for social media.
Okay.
And its implications. You may know that it was on the Vatican website. It was a document that was published a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And maybe you had a chance to look over this.
May 29th.
I had a chance to look over through this. It's called Towards Full Presence, a pastoral reflection on engagement with social media. And the whole point of this document is to help us as Catholics engage social media as Catholics and as Christian people and as witnesses and what that means. And before I would talk a little bit about the document, I wanted to share just a couple of scriptures from James, the letter of James, New Testament, chapter 3. And James writes this: "Consider how small a fire can set a huge forest ablaze. Well, the tongue is also a fire. It exists among our members as a world of malice, defiling the whole body and setting the entire course of our lives on fire. Itself set on fire by Gehenna. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by human species, but no human being can tame the tongue." Wow. It's kind of a pessimistic look at words,
Man.
but even throughout the scriptures, the power of words, the power of language.
And what's that, Gehenna?
Gehenna actually means hell.
Okay, just want to make sure we still believed in
It's
that.
set on the fire of hell.
That's right.
And then he goes on to say, with the same amount we bless God and then curse our brothers.
Yeah, sure.
And that's exactly what social media can do as well. It can do two things. We can bless or we can curse. And too often I think we get sucked into the cursing
Right.
curse mode of social media and what it can do. So just a couple of things. I want you to get your comments on this. What I appreciated about this document is that it said, Father, that social media is here to stay.
Sure.
And we've got to learn to live with it. And it is a legitimate means of communication. There's a part in this document that says we've got to stop separating this, having this either or mentality, that to have real communications, you got to be in person. No. Social media is real communication. And the question is, how do we use it? So it actually sees social media as a positive. It doesn't spend a lot of time talking about its negatives.
Right. Well, I mean, I think there is a dichotomy out there that we want to say, well, and I certainly would lean towards that opinion of face-to-face in person is always best, and but to the detriment of legitimate forms of communication. I mean, texting and emailing are legitimate forms of communication as well. What we're doing right now in the podcast,
We are communicating.
filming and speaking
Yep.
and recording this, this is legitimate communication. I think that obviously there are levels, and there's certain communications are better for certain circumstances. So I mean, they're not all equal, and I don't think anyone would really say that either. But there is tremendous value in face-to-face, in-person
course.
communication. But there's also still a type of value in social media, but therefore, since it's been around for, I think, really, I remember AOL when I was little, America Online, and nobody remembers that anymore. But that was, you've got mail, that famous, you got email, and you were emailing people and chatting online and meeting people, and just remember that experience being very strange and just sort of exciting, that that you're typing and someone's responding right back to you on the computer, and you're not just sending an email, or you're not just writing letters. So that was a unique experience, which also, as a teenager, those, it was the World Wide Web, and there's, of course, this world, rightly so, being brought into being, if you will, and that, and there's not, world has to be governed, and we have to use judgment in this world. And as a teenager, you have to use judgment on, who you were chatting with and talking to, and just not assuming that everybody that's sending you a message is legitimate. Who, you think it's a certain person, but maybe it's not.
Right. And I think we've all experienced on social media, there's something about when we are behind a keyboard and anonymous, it does something to us, and that the most spiteful and hateful comments can come because these people are cloaked in anonymity. Mm-hmm. And that's really where the temptations of being destructive, how social media can be destructive. But what this document says is that, but it can be so constructive too. Mm-hmm. But that our dialogue with others, even through the internet, is very personal. It's deeply personal. I mean, people listening to this podcast right now, who knows what they're doing, but it's a personal encounter with them, this dialogue that we're having.
Right.
And Pope Francis says that, quoting this document, Pope Francis has acknowledged that the digital world is indistinguishable from the sphere of everyday life, and it is changing the way humanity accumulates knowledge, disseminates information, and develops relationships, how we are relating to other people. Now, the document does start with a couple of the pitfalls of social media, and I'll read a couple of sentences and you can comment on this. The first thing that they say is that for all the good that social media can do, it has created a digital divide. There is a social media divide, and that's becoming even more acute. Platforms that promise to build community and bring the world closer together have instead deepened various forms of division.
And what paragraph is that?
That would be on paragraph 12, the last sentence there, paragraph 12, that these platforms promise to bring people together, but instead they're deepening various forms of divisions.
Certainly that's true. I don't think anyone would argue with those assessments. I do believe this document is providing time to really dialogue about this, and that the church has a lot to say about social media, and that we should listen, because really the church stepped into forming the conscience in the realm of communication, not with this document, but even with Vatican II. Communication was part of teaching the church how to be in the world in this form of communication that was in the 60s. You had television and radio waves, and that was very different from when the first Vatican Council met in the late 1800s.
That's right.
So there's this new that was a new world that the church had to live in.
Right.
And acknowledge.
Yep. According to the document again, today it is not possible to talk about social media without considering its commercial value. That is, without the awareness that the actual revolution occurred when brands and institutions realized the strategic potential of social platforms, contributing to a rapid consolidation of languages and practices that over the years transformed users into consumers. Additionally, individuals are both consumers and commodities. As consumers, they are presented with data-driven advertising. I mean, algorithms, Father. They know what we're doing, and sponsored content in a tailor-made way. And then, as commodities, their profiles and data are sold to other businesses with the same end in mind. And then it goes on to say, quoting someone else, if you are not paying for it, the social media platform you're using, you are the product. In other words, it is not free. We are paying with minutes of our attention and bytes of our data. So that's some of the pitfalls here that we have to understand, that there is an algorithm that can manipulate the imagination that serves the bottom line of some company very well. It's not bad to support a company. We just have to know that there's more to it than just this neutrality that we think when we approach it.
Sure. No, it's good to see really the undercurrent of what's been driving so much of social media, is that this is also about advertising and product consumer.
Yeah. So in paragraph 19, it says, in a time when we are increasingly divided, and this was really Pope Francis's worry, and is his worry about social media. The worry is that when individuals do not treat each other as human beings, but as mere expressions of a certain point of view that they do not share, we witness another expression of the throwaway culture that Pope Francis talks about, that proliferates the globalization of indifference. And I really love that, because that is the temptation. All we see from people, you can think of comment boxes on YouTube or Facebook replies. We just see comments.
Right. Sure.
And then the temptation is to reduce everybody down to an idea or to how they're feeling about something. And if you disagree with it, what happens?
You're out.
You're out. You want to cancel that person. But that on the other side of that keyboard is a human being. And that we cannot be indifferent. So what the document really does, it goes on to use the parable of the Good Samaritan, is that we have the temptation with social media to be like the priest who passed by the man lying on the side of the road and doing nothing. Or we can be like the Samaritan and try to actually think of ourselves as having a real encounter with someone else. And then that is the good that social media can actually generate for us. And so we need to think of it to get out of this individual silo mentality, just me and my computer,
right,
me and my phone, me and my comments, or me and my ideas, and realize that we should use social media as Catholics to build a real community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, using the parable of the Good Samaritan, challenging us, I think the paragraph 20, the good point of why should I care, might be the first reaction. But he says we can even find this attitude in the Bible, starting with Cain's refusal to be his brother's keeper. And continuing with the scribe, we asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? The scribe wanted to set a limit regarding who is and who is not my neighbor. It seems that we would like to find a justification for our own indifference. We are always trying to draw a line between us and them, between someone I have to treat with respect and someone I can ignore. In this way, almost imperceptibly, we grow incapable of feeling compassion for others, as if their sufferings were their own responsibility and none of our business. That, those lines were spot on.
Yeah, because all we see are the words of someone.
Sure, and
not the
with
person.
Comment boxes too, you're just seeing blips in a emoji and then words. So,
yep.
I think that the concern would be, what is social media driving at right now? I mean, even though it's a positive medium for communication, is it being driven by that zeal anymore,
mm-hmm.
or has it really become more of an industry of warfare? Right? It's the battleground where people just go to square off and destroy each other. It's the digital coliseum where everybody else sits back and watches these talking heads go after each other and tear each other apart. And what, right?
Right. Well, one of the things it says here is that from the perspective of faith, what to communicate and how to communicate is not only a practical question, it's a spiritual one. And I love this understanding is that we have got to approach even social media from a theological point of view, that every time we open up the apps and begin to post, as Catholics especially, we are doing this as witnesses to Jesus. Mm-hmm. And that is inseparable from our online media persona. And we have to understand that we have to engage this as Catholic people,
right?
As witnesses to the good news, and not sowing division and not sowing hurt. Because it talks about the digital highway, and there are people laying on the side of the road of the digital highway who have been hurt by the divisive rhetoric that we see and have been a part of and maybe even been subject to. Are you on social media, Father?
Really, no. I think this podcast is the most I've ever done for quite some time. I had Facebook years and years, and ago, and I've gotten away from it. I think at that time too, it was still fairly new, and I just was a little untrusting of it. But I mean, I think that priests and people in the church do need to consider having a presence on social media. I just don't know that everybody does. So I'm not sure that I'm that priest. I mean, I like the podcast that we're doing. It's very wonderful. But I mean, as far as having a Twitter account, or I just don't see that that's needed. And maybe it will be seen that is later. But I mean, Bishop Barron and does great with Word on Fire. I mean, that is its own social media component, really, industry that he has. So I don't have a large social media presence individually.
One of the things the document talks about is that before we even begin to post anything on social media or use it, that the call for Catholics is that we should always exercise a proper examination of conscience regarding our presence on social media, and it should include three things: with God, our neighbor, and the environment around us. I mean, I love that idea of examining our conscience before we leave a comment, because the trap, as you know, I mean, on social media, we've all sent the email that out of some sort of rage.
Yeah,
I mean, you just hit send, boom. But to slow down and really think through about what we are posting.
Right. I think that's really what one of the main tenets of the document seems to be asking us for, is discern. Just like anytime you're using words, discern what you're about to say.
Yeah.
And with social media, it's out there sort of forever.
That's right. And doesn't the Lord himself say that we will be, and I think it's always bothered me, that we will be judged by our words, every word that we speak, every idle word that we speak.
Well, the gospel today really hit on that, with Jesus saying, if you say to your brother Raka, or you fool, you'll be liable to judgment, to fiery Gehenna. So we will be responsible, yes, for every word that we speak foolishly or carelessly, or in retaliation or hatred.
Yeah.
We want to confess that, but that, yes, it's good to be sober-minded about our words.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that it also talks about is that when people speak our language on social media, we tend to want to go with the tribe. And but this sows division. And the document actually calls out Catholics who use their social media presence to foster division. This is in paragraph 55. When groups that present themselves as Catholic use their social media presence to foster division, they are not behaving like a Christian community should. Instead of capitalizing on conflicts and adversarial clickbait, hostile attitudes should become opportunities for conversion. Interesting. An opportunity to witness encounter, dialogue, reconciliation around seemingly divisive matters. But there are Catholics who are using their presence to foster division, and yet the hostility or the conflict that we feel should actually present an opportunity for conversion. I mean, talk a little bit about that, Father.
Well, I think that the digital tribalism is a good way of talking about, as it says here, polarization. So, I mean, certainly there are blogs and websites and social media platforms that are polarizing, or capitalizing on being polarizing, right? I mean, we're going to be a leftist platform, so we'll capitalize off drawing on the leftist-minded people our way, and the right, same thing, right? So I think that's very easy to do, and it's seen that way, and just, again, a platform that makes everybody who wants to follow feel vindicated. Look, I was right, I'm always right, you know. Everything I believe is here, just as I thought it ought to be. But how do you move beyond that? So I do think that as a great concern, we can fall into that, and I think as leaders, as church leaders, pastors, bishops, any ordained, any public figure in the church, even if that's a layperson, the choices of posting need to be very weighted.
Well, again, it goes back to the examination of conscience. You know, a few weeks ago we talked about how an industry has been created, we think, on social media regarding criticisms of Pope Francis.
Right.
But there was another tweet by a bishop, and maybe you had a chance to see this. I will share just a portion of it. But this is from a bishop. It was a tweet, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. He says, I believe Pope Francis is the Pope, but it is time for me to say that I reject his program of undermining the deposit of faith. And then the period, the next sentence is follow Jesus. I mean, could this be, to me that sounds divisive.
Right. So what are you left with? I think on one level you're left with, well, again, a bishop is the normative, and he's the supreme local ordinary, supreme shepherd in that local part of the church. That if there's concern about the deposit of faith, I would want to know what that would be. How is it being? What's the program that's undermining the deposit of faith, and what part of the deposit of faith is being undermined specifically? Because I may not know what that means as a layperson. I may not understand. Okay, what do you mean the deposit of faith is being harmed by the program?
Yeah, what is the program?
And Pope Francis, what's the program? And then also at the end you have, of course, that cryptic line, follow Jesus. So that is that an invitation to separate oneself in heart from the Holy Father? Is it just ignore him and pretend he's not there, and they'll let us know when he dies? Kind of a approach. So again, what that bishop was getting at, we don't know, because that's all one would have to go off of. Is that tweet?
Well,
that
the thing
post?
is, I just have to say, if you're going to, many people have criticized the Pope for being ambiguous and unclear, but this strikes me as being ambiguous and unclear.
So
there's no context.
So what the question there is this inviting some separateness mentality?
Tribalism.
Is it just, look, he's the Pope, but let's move on. Let's go over here. Let's go our own way. So are you getting into the danger of separating yourself from the Roman pontiff?
Right.
So that alludes to me that that's being laid in the groundwork there. Follow Jesus. Well, okay. How do we know we're following Jesus? Right? So we have our church leaders to tell us that too. And when they don't, right, what do? We follow Christ and stay in union with the church in all things. But also there is a respect and obedience that's required of us as clerics to not only our ordinary, but to the Holy Father. There is no way around that.
You're right.
To stay in union with Rome is necessary. And to suggest that Rome is departing, not being faithful anymore, then I'm saying, well, how do you know that that's happening? Yeah. And then if this Pope is legitimate, but some say he's not, well, then how do you know that? And then how do you know when a legitimate Pope is elected? Right. What gives you that sense? There's the election process and the conclave that I'm assuming is followed to the letter.
Yeah. My guess would be the program of undermining the only thing I could think of would be the synodality, this move that parishes have participated in. This is just a guess. And I think a lot of people have misconstrued what the synod is about. And maybe we do a podcast on that.
Yeah.
I mean, the sum of it is that how can we get the ministerial priesthood, the bishops, the clergy, the priests, the deacons, in conversation with the common priesthood, the baptized, the lay faithful, and ask ourselves, what is the Holy Spirit calling the church to do, and how can we both use our gifts together for the sake of evangelization?
Yeah, right.
I mean, the synod, everybody, however you want to, whatever you've heard about it, its ultimate goal is evangelization. It is bringing people into union to Christ through the Holy Eucharist. That's what it's really about. And I don't see in any sense this undermining the deposit of faith. This is what the faith looks like in the context of the New Testament.
Right. Sure.
It's the clergy and the lay together.
Sure.
The lay using their gifts, and as you've said, share with Vatican II in one of your homilies, the lay faithful have the primary responsibility to consecrate the world, and it's not just the clergy who are going to shape the mission of the church. That's what my experience as being a participant in the synod in our diocese has been. What is the Holy Spirit calling us to do? What do you think, priests? What do you think, bishops? What do you think, lay faithful?
Sure. Which are 99.962% of the church.
Right.
The lay faithful. So, and synods are not new.
No, Acts chapter 15 was a synod.
So synods are not new in the life of the church. And I suppose if there's just ambiguity that it's frustrating people, then those who have the leadership role need to bring the clarity. And that doesn't just mean one leader. That means a local leader might have to step in and say, okay, apparently my faithful are unclear, or they're confused by something coming from Rome or a directive from Rome, but the bishops have, they are invested with the teaching authority of the church, and you with the Holy Father, they must teach. That's their role.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's confusion or wrong, divisive attitudes arising, the bishops have to address that in their own diocese. Who's supposed to do that? That's why they're there. You can't just lament that leadership isn't the way you would prefer it or like it, or and even one might be critical of it, but that doesn't supplant the responsibility of bishops to shepherd. It's just they have to.
Yeah. No
one can do it for them. And that's why the wisdom of the church in most dioceses, you have one bishop. The bigger archdioceses have some auxiliaries that assist, but again, still, you know who the head is.
Mm-hmm.
And the head has to speak, the head has to teach and clarify and correct if needed, right? So the point being is that, a post like that, what's that leading to? What's that helping? What is that drawing out of the lay faithful and the presbyterate? Is it just drawing a line in the sand of divisiveness? Okay, fine. So we have people who like the Holy Father and those who don't. Well, liking him is irrelevant. We're supposed to pray for him, follow him, have obedience, respect to the supreme governing authority of the church in all matters of faith and morals, and in matters of discipline and governance. He has supreme and immediate authority in those areas. So we are to be modeling for those who are not Catholic, of course, this love for Christ, love for one another.
Yes.
And if we just jump on to the social media platform to just attack and cut down for the sake of attacking and cutting down, then what image are we showing?
I could go on and mention several things. I will just make this one comment, and I have shared this with just a couple of people, and that we underestimate the power of this new platform and the power of information whenever it is being able to be spread with ease. How, this is my point, if you really look back and study your history of the Protestant Reformation, what was the real key to its success? Well, it coincided with the invention of the printing press. And suddenly the Protestants were able to get their message out. What would have been what we would consider fringe voices, suddenly we're kind of into the mainstream. And so when I see Catholics using divisive language on social media, and it can be more hostile and more filled with conflict, I take that very seriously. Don't think we could not have, using this new communication platform, which is wonderful, digital media, that we could not have another major schism in the church. We have to take that very seriously.
Yeah, I think that's a very serious concern, to be sure. So when there's this attitude of pulling away, I think that's a danger.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that the document encourages us to do as Catholic people? How can we better use social media? Well, one of the things it says is that, first of all, we should remember, and this is paragraph 65, that whatever we share in our posts, comments, and likes, in spoken or written words, in film or animated images, should align with the style that we learned from Christ, who transmitted his message not only in speech, but in the whole manner of his life, which is giving of self in love. That's the first step. How do we communicate? Is it compatible with how Christ himself communicates? And that is with love, and that is with a sense of neighborliness.
Yeah.
Paragraph 66, to communicate truth, we must first make sure that we are conveying truthful information, not only in creating content, but also in sharing it. And I love that. Or is what you are posting on social media, is the link you're sharing on social media, is it really true? Or is it opinion? That too, because I know that we can get caught up in someone sends a link to me and it fires me up and I share the link with somebody else, and it may ultimately not be truthful in every way. So it comes back down to, again, our witness as disciples of Jesus Christ. Is it true, and is it neighborly with what we are posting?
Right. No, those are good criteria.
And then in paragraph 77, along these lines, presenting ideas, teachings, thoughts, spiritual reflections, and the like on social media needs to be faithful to the Christian tradition. In other words, all that we do should bear the mark of witness. We are not present in social media as Catholics to sell a product. We are not advertising, but communicating life, the life that was given to us in Christ. Therefore, every Christian must be careful not to proselytize, but give witness. What does proselytize mean?
I've always understood it to be a forceful encounter to getting someone to become Catholic.
Kind of is it in a kind of a coercive way?
I think so, sure. I mean, it's definitely not used in a positive way.
Right.
You know, people say, don't proselytize me. I guess maybe it means don't force me or don't coerce me. But
yeah.
But truly, the church does not thrive in that way. It's not about arguing people into the faith forcefully. It's invitation, accompaniment, being with them, teaching them to be with Christ, and seeing what happens.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'll mention in the document that I really did appreciate is that it talks about how there are personalities on social media who we call influencers. And they can create big followings and they can shape the imagination. But what the document says is that all of us, if we're on social media, whatever accounts that we have, we may not be grand influencers, but we are all micro influencers. We all have an influence. And in paragraph 74, it says we should all take our influence seriously. Every Christian should be aware of his or her potential influence, no matter how many followers he or she has. True. I mean, even if you've only got 10 followers on your Facebook account, you still have the ability to influence those followers. And are you influencing them in a way that is a Christian witness?
Right.
And then the last thing, we must be mindful of posting and sharing content that can cause misunderstanding, exacerbate division, incite conflict, and deepen prejudices. The problem of polemical and superficial and divisive communication is particularly worrying when it comes from church leadership. We've talked about that. But the Christian style should be reflective, not reactive on social media.
Yeah.
Our style should be reflective, not reactive on social media.
Certainly rich teaching there. Rich teaching, easy to remember, to take home for those of us that want to know how to approach social media. Right? I think that's key. Just reflectiveness, discernment. Praying even a Hail Mary, simple prayers before you send an email. You're frustrated, just acknowledging your frustrations, saying this is not the best time to respond to maybe anything.
Right.
So, no, that's good wisdom.
Yeah, so I really do commend the document to all of our listeners here, Towards Full Presence.
Yes.
You can find it on the Vatican website. You can also find it by just doing a simple Google search as well. But social media is with us.
It is.
It's a great platform. We can evangelize through it in a great way. But all of us, even on our personal accounts, is it evangelizing? Are we speaking truthfully, lovingly, and neighborly, and not reducing everybody to just their ideas? All of these insights, I think, are worthy of our reflection.
I agree.
Any closing comments, Father?
No, I think as we move through the summer months, being vigilant in social media usage, limiting it if we know it's something that's eating up a lot of our time and taking away from responsibilities, and again, being present to those who are around us, our families, our spouses, children, more during the summer months, trying to see how can I be more present to those who I need to be present to right now. And again, limiting social media engagement if we know that that's a lot of time. I'm tempted during the day to be on social media for a long time. We need to remember what we made Lenten promises for and say maybe that still is a problem. I need to reduce that or put some boundaries in place.
Yeah. Right. Well,
to free the heart. Right?
Sure. And before we go, I want to say that we will not have a podcast next week because both of us are going to be kind of on mission to Phoenix, Arizona. I've never been. I think it's warmer than it will be here.
It will be. We'll be at the Amazing Parish Summit. So if you don't know what the Amazing Parish movement is, do look that up. The Amazing Parish, great movement of pastors and priests and lay faithful that work in parish life to build leadership teams to help advance the culture of discipleship in the parish, to transform the parish. The parish can transform the city, and the transformation of Christ flows out.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a great week together. And thank you all for listening. And on behalf of Father Rossi and this amazing parish at St. Michael, I want to thank you for listening. Be a witness on social media and stay on the ship of Peter. Until next time, God bless. Bye-bye.